Silver Society.
Welcome to the Silver Society podcast. This is our public version of the AMA, the Ask Me Anything. That's what the acronym means. And this is Justin A.W. Blair from the Silver Society. Going to be answering your questions, going to be talking through. Why are you snickering over there? I said,
let's do the intro like we're on, public radio or something? If you want to work for NPR, just immediately lead with and this is why carpets are actually white supremacy.
You do the same thing. It's just you don't have the vocal range that I do. So you do a different version of it. But that's
yes,
fine.
I do a different version.
Welcome.
I say, welcome to the Silver Society. We are here with our monthly AMA. This is for March. And yes, we are.
Right, but it's false. It's a false look at you. You don't actually go talk to people on the street like that. You don't say, welcome to the thing, the thing, the thing, the thing. No one talks like that. So can we
there's a little bit of art to it, a little bit of performance. The people know there's a difference, between the stiff
first question
radio voice. Listen. Whoa. This is why you're not allowed to do things. Okay. We've got several questions here that we're going to be answering. We've got, these are questions that people submitted, okay? We need to recognize the people that participated and let everybody know what's coming. So we got some interesting questions. Y'all went really intense on this one. We got a lot of really good questions. So we're going to talk about why those who presume to have free and open minds are often so adversarial. Also, how to move beyond the Afro-Pessimism lens of progressive leftist radical worldviews. What in the world are you looking to encounter? This is an interesting philosophical question, so I like that. And we'll tie up with how to develop discernment versus judgment. And then we'll jump into the patron-only portion for the party.
Tell them about the patron-only portion.
The patron-only portion is the most exciting, the most fun, the most controversial. Who knows what's in the patron-only portion besides the patrons? But I will tell you, we're going to talk about technology and literature and why that's can be annoying, like the mention of social media. And we will also talk about if there's any creative art out there challenging culture, and mention some of the art that I think right now is challenging the bad direction our culture is going in, and we'll go into that a little more. And we're going to speak about an ever relevant topic: how do we coexist with safetyism without compromising individual freedom? And a special question from a special patron: what is? We're going to do that. We're going to try to do that. So let's.
And how do people get to that?
Oh, the patron-only version?
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you asked. The patron-only version of the AMA can be accessed by patrons. Patrons become patrons by joining the Silver Society on Patreon. And that's where patrons come from. Okay, let us go.
Great. I'm throwing us off the script briefly.
Yeah,
also, I will answer a more interesting question, which is what's up with Space Pen? It's something from the beginning of our podcast.
Save it to the end. Save the best.
Yeah, it'll be patron only. It'll be on the patron only episode. And let's just jump in here because your introduction again has bored me almost to the state of tears.
Well, that will make a great episode, so maybe I should go a little longer. Why are those who presume to have free, open minds often so adversarial? You wanna tell us? You're pretty adversarial.
So I think that you've misunderstood this question, and I'll deal with it correctly. Those who presume to have free, open minds, often so adversarial. I like to really read into the question.
Yeah, you do.
Understand it instead of just randomly saying things. So I think the simple answer is that people with free and open minds often go against the whatever narrative is prevalent in the wider culture. And so, of course, they appear adversarial because correctly so they are adversarial. Done. That's the end of my
Well, yes, I took this question differently, which is because of the word presume. we're not actually necessarily talking about people that have free and open minds. These are people that believe themselves to have free and open minds. The word adversarial can be difficult in this, right? Because contrarian, a person that's a contrarian would be more likely to, you know, obviously push back against other beliefs, despite maybe wanting to entertain many different beliefs as they try to pick what they're going to believe. But I don't think this question is about that. I think this question is about a phenomena that we see a lot of, which is people that are so open, so free in everything, that there's no gender, there's no such thing as sex, and it's okay to have a polyamorous, polycule, whatever, these words that people are making up to describe things that have never existed before, and how those are better than the things that you're doing, and you're wrong because you're not joining in on those things. I think that, like, contrasting that kind of supposed free mind or free belief where no tradition is worth heeding to and everything that is of the past is needing criticism, that kind of like adversarial attitude, I think it's just like the same thing as anything, which is that people present themselves to be the opposite of what they are a lot of the time, because that's better than presenting yourself as like a dislikable person. So if you're actually someone that's trying to push your worldview on people, the best way to do that is to present yourself as someone that would never do that. So I think that this kind of like, this is referencing, there's kind of like a fundamentalist attitude in what was once the liberal side of society, the liberal subculture, where you wanted to accept people and entertain different beliefs. And the idea of, you know, free speech has always been something that was characteristically protected by the left. And now it's not. So if these are the people that are so, you know, free and open-minded, why have they started to take this position that's adversarial towards different ideas and different, you know, speech even? And I think that that's essentially what it is. I think that people hide their motives behind the opposite of what they're doing. I think that's like the same thing. It made me think of like nonprofits, right? Like nonprofits that are in some of them are incredibly corrupt. You have like CEOs of nonprofits making millions of dollars a year. And it's a question of, you know, if you're supposed to be helping children with cancer, wouldn't that be better put to use for the children with cancer? But it's a nonprofit. So I think that there's this kind of like sleight of hand thing where people hide behind something that is the opposite of what their actual mode of being is. Just kind of like a little bit of in the Jungian idea of, you know, the shadow and whatever, and being like kind of bipolar like that in how you present yourself.
Excellent. Do you want me to continue off that?
I don't know.
I was just looking up stuff about biolabs while you were talking about that.
Why?
Because to try to get us to the ultimate question about Space Pen later in the podcast.
You need to stop bringing things into the podcast that no one cares about. Like, that's not how you develop a successful podcast. Like, I can't just pick up a shoe and be like, oh, we're going to talk about my shoe, my one shoe, my singular shoe that I've given a name. That's what this podcast is about now.
You don't know anything about Space Pen. You
no
don't know how
one
many
knows.
Space Pens
no
I have.
No one knows, and
That's
no one
right.
cares.
And they will know later in the podcast.
I hope not, because so far, I think we've already lost, you know, a good portion of the people. You, Space Pen,
Listen,
and me rambling.
This whole thing, enough of this stuff about, the free speech and all this kind of stuff. It's bullshit. You're being lied to. You're being fooled. Stop playing this game. Like, you're like, I don't know. Are they serious about what? No one's even claiming on the farthest parts of the left to be into free speech anymore. It's like we're still talking about a mindset that's like 20 or 30 years old. What are we doing here? Do you think people are lying to us? Yeah.
Because they wear the corpse of what they once were. Like, the left still lays claim to this idea of being liberal, of being accepting, of being open, of being tolerant, but they're not. And so there's a discrepancy between that. There's a strangeness in that kind of like Jekyll and Hyde political identity, where you claim to be, you know, the champion of those left behind and the outsiders, but you're actively creating tons of outsiders by punishing and rejecting anyone that doesn't like immediately acquiesce to ever changing and incredibly myopic ideals.
Your analysis is still rooted in this idea.
Well, what are they?
Well, I've been reading a lot about Stalin and Lenin and the communist revolution.
That's
and
the
the
same
Russian
thing,
Revolution.
though. That was the same kind of dynamic. This idea of like, oh, the working class, the peasants,
Yes,
we're going
and
to
they
throw off
believed it.
the aristocracy. Well, those
Absolutely.
were the people, the peasants are the ones that they ended up most subjugating. Most of those people were the ones that died.
Well, anyway, but that's the point is that there is a history of people will say extreme leftists blatantly lying in order to get power, in order to enact what they believe is correct. They truly believe it's correct, but they would consider your whole discussion about the morality of lying and the morality of free speech as bourgeois bullshit. And what I'm trying to say is that the people who really understand this, the people that are serious, not the people that are on Twitter and don't understand what they're like arguing about transgender swimmers. Fuck that. That doesn't matter. I'm talking about the people that like are serious and understand things. They don't care about lying to you. So you're still in this mindset of like, hey, can't we all get together and like have a free speech? Here's something I noticed recently. When's the last time you've seen a debate? You know, if like a debate on these issues, like of someone from the right and the left coming together and actually debating. That isn't popular. That isn't popular, number one. Yeah, it happens sometimes, but it's also not very popular.
No.
I don't think even people... Go ahead. I'm trying to fucking engage with this
Well,
question.
don't ask
You're
me
just,
a question if you
Twitter.
don't want me to answer it. I was going to say...
I'm not fucking finished. I'm trying to... The proletariat... Go ahead.
I am not above interrupting you, okay? The people that know that I will. The thing is that, I mean, they had this recently. It was, Ben Shapiro and the Young Turks woman. What is her name? I can't remember. The blonde one?
Anna something or another.
Yeah. And they are, you know, obviously ideologically opposed to each other or whatever. And they had a debate. I didn't watch it all, but I think you're right. I think it's, like, not even culturally popular. But this is also kind of what I get to is, like, my beat is not necessarily useless just because I'm not dealing with like the top levels of powerful people strategizing politically. I deal more in the culture war, okay? And that's the thing. These people that are not above lying, that will, you know, use these ideas of, inclusivity and equity and all these things, like, I completely agree. I think that there are people that know exactly what they're doing, weaponize those ideas, just like we've seen those things happen throughout history with the same kind of leftist, you know, inclusive, underdog, working class rhetoric, and then turn around and sacrifice those very people to maintain the power that they were trying to gain all along. But the thing is...
And so what I'm trying to say is, and I'm not above interrupting you, so
Lord
over and
knows.
over again for the last year, I keep being told by you, hey, let's start the podcast at X amount of time. And then I, like a moron, show up on time with the setup and everything done and ready to go, right? But just like a communist, you just lie and lie and lie for your own power or whatever. And so what I've decided to do, and what I suggest everyone here does, is stop listening to the lies and go about your business. The other thing, Ben Shapiro and the Young Turks, I mean, like, look.
It's not our greatest. It's not our greatest as a culture.
It's not.
He's not okay.
They're not.
I won't slander
They're not
him.
even. Here's the thing that I'm going to end on this, okay? The idea that Ben Shapiro is an avatar of like the right wing and that the Young Turks is an avatar of hardcore leftists, that's a joke. That's play acting. There are multimillionaire speakers who have media organizations who primarily align themselves with the two major political parties in this country. The idea that this is like, oh my God, should we ban this from the campus because it's so scary? You motherfuckers don't know what the real left is. You don't know what the real right is. Read some history. Pick up Stalin's, the biography of Stalin by Kotkin is the guy's name. Beautiful, wonderful book. I'm about 300 pages into it. If you want to understand things about the extreme left and the extreme right, that'll give you a lens to start looking at. This is all just play acting to me at this point. Because none of this, all the anger on Twitter and the questions on this, most of this doesn't really matter that much until a catastrophe hits, if it does. And then these segments of the left and the right actually start to, things get bad. That's what I'm more concerned about, especially as I read details of the history of when empires start to collapse. That's what happened. The Russian Revolution happened in the wake of a collapse of an empire. If you live in America, you live in an empire. You may not think you do, but you do. You live in an empire, dummies. We have military bases all around the world, hundreds of them. We have soldiers stationed everywhere. You live in an empire. You can, and now we can have a debate about colonialism and all that. Fuck that. Forget about it. Here's the thing. The empire, when it does, if it does fall in decline, then all these discussions about whether Ben Shapiro should be censored on Twitter is not going to fucking make a bit of difference. Because what you see, if hopefully not, but if real bad things happen, like bad economic collapse, then all this conversation right now that's just kind of a culture war, which is, a lot of it is honestly just, it's really just to get clicks on like YouTube videos. Like the whole last week has been every supposedly intellectual on the internet talking about Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. Is this a serious country? Is this a serious situation? No, it's not. So I feel blessed to live in an empire that still has a little bit of legs underneath of it. I'm simply saying, prepare yourself in case really bad things happen. And then you can argue all you want on Twitter about Will Smith or about Anna Kasparian or whatever on Twitter while you're scrounging for grain. And we all laugh, but man, this shit isn't gonna be fucking funny if China invades Taiwan.
Okay.
Do you like that answer? I tried to just go ahead and just move along to the next question, but I'm trying to, now you've pushed me into warning about a potential apocalypse.
I didn't drink enough coffee to prepare for this discussion.
Well, I drank too much coffee because I was waiting for you to start the podcast, and you kept on texting me, I need 30 more minutes. And so I was like listening to your Marxist lies, and then I kept drinking tea over and over again and reading about Stalin. So this is what you get. And patrons, if you sign up at the $2 level, you'll get the private AMA and be able
where
to
we
hear
physically
even
fight
more.
each other. Okay.
All right, can we move on now to the next question?
Yeah, I agree that the empire is actually good. That's where I want to be, not on the non-empire part. That's still not the best place to be, usually. So I endorse all of the things. And yes, prepare for the end. That's always a good, be prepared. Okay. All right, going from bad to worse. So one of our questions was how to move beyond the Afro-Pessimism lens of progressive leftist racial worldview. Okay, so look, I'm not a scholar of Afro-Pessimism. That doesn't sound like something I'd want to be a scholar of. That sounds in the name like something that you would likely want to avoid as adopting as a worldview. It has pessimism in the name. So that's probably a clue that it's not going to do you a lot of good as an individual. But from my understanding of what this is, briefly, to make it as simple as possible, Afro-pessimism seems to be the philosophy that Black people are everywhere in the world the worst off, and yet everywhere in the world the most integral. I'm probably getting this wrong. This is what I've read briefly about it. I'm not going to debate the details of the philosophy because I frankly don't care. I don't find it interesting. But for the sake of this question, it's the idea that it's racial pessimism centered around Black identity. So we will deal with it from there. My belief in the worldview that says everything is about racial subjugation is that this is probably not going to be a worldview that brings you success as a person unless you are one of the intellectuals that peddle that view and sell books and lectures telling other people that they will always be on the lowest rung of society and that there's essentially no point to anything because you will always be under the boot of everyone else. That seems terrible. And what strikes me about this as being something that's really kind of a poisonous worldview is that it seems to require just enough comfort to be able to entertain that kind of pessimism. Because the reality is that some of the most inspiring, positive, forward-moving philosophies came out of times with far more suffering and far more subjugation than the one that we live in. So it strikes me as something that is a luxury of people that have obtained a certain level of comfort in life to be able to turn around and then tell everyone else, you should give up. It's always going to be bad and you're always going to be on the bottom. That's a horrible thing to try to sell people as a worldview. Especially if they actually do have it bad in life. You're just robbing people of any hope. And maybe that's the idea, right? Well, there is no hope. Well, I actually think that there's something important to understand about any kind of ideology that tells you the structure of the world is ultimately bad and that you should not have hope for it to be better and that you should view the world through a pessimistic lens, is that there is a logical answer to that worldview, and it is to kill yourself. That's it. If you are always going to be the loser in life, that is the structure of the world, and there's nothing you can do about it because it will always come back down to that, then you shouldn't live that life. That would make sense then. That is the logical conclusion of these kind of extremely pessimistic racial views and also larger pessimistic views like nihilism. This is just to me a kind of racial nihilism.
Excuse me. I'm not going to comment much on this question, but I'm going to say one thing about it. Because I didn't know what Afro-Pessimism was, and I'm not going to sit here on a podcast and read the Wikipedia entry to something and try to speak to it. What I am going to say, though, is there's a flaw in what you're saying right there, which is that you think that the natural conclusion for an adherent to this belief is to just give up, and that's not the point of it. The point of it is to say you're so subjugated that the only alternative is revolution.
You just fucked up my point.
I just made your point faster.
That's the point that I was going to make.
More awesome way.
You just fucked up my whole point. I did all this work to set it up, and you robbed it from me. You ripped it right out from under me. The last sentence that I was... This is why the Marxists do what they do. Because you can't play fair. Look at what you've done to me. You've stolen all my work. Now I had to do all the shitty part, and you got to come in and be like, actually, here's the really juicy part. Silence yourself. Do not steal any more of my thunder from me as I explain this. That is the point that I was going to make, is that while the first logical conclusion to a worldview that says everything is terrible and always will be would be, well, then why don't you get out of this world? There is another option, which is instead, I will live and I will make this world as full of suffering as possible for retribution for my shitty existence. And that's, I think, what you get to when you understand these kind of pessimistic, whether they be racial or other views that are essentially a kind of nihilism in their core, is that most people won't actually kill themselves because they do want to live. There is a shred of people that wants to live. They just take these pessimistic worldviews, and then the natural conclusion of that is that life is unfair and unjust, and there's no way to right that, so you might as well fight against it and cause suffering. It's like a kind of counterbalance. Well, life is suffering, so I'll cause my own suffering then and make other people suffer in return. It's actually really scary to think about. When I was thinking about this question and I was writing out the answer that you stole from me, I came to this conclusion thinking, well, from my understanding of Afro-Pessimism, it basically says, and now I'm not an expert on it, so whatever, I don't care. I read an article on it, that's enough. I'm not going to study Afro-Pessimism, but I am going to give an opinion on it. It's my right. I have the right to speech. I have the right to be wrong. And it's essentially this, that everything comes down to this racial oppression, and that's a kind of like inevitable structure, which seems to me just absolutely dark of a thing to try to push as a worldview. Even if that was true, I'm not sure you should adopt that worldview. Like there's some place for the delusion of hope. But then as I started to kind of like expand it out and thought, well, if that was true, if I took on that worldview, I would think, well, what's the point of living? And then I realized, no, there would be a point to live, and it would be out of revenge. And so here we are. Make what you will of that. Perhaps we're seeing some of that play out. I think we do see it play out on different levels, though. It doesn't have to just be racial. It's also just like, it actually reminded me of something weirdly like different, but at the same time of the same outcome. So, like the Columbine shooters and stuff like that, these kind of people that are notoriously nihilistic in their hatred towards life, in their sense that life isn't worth living because it's unfair, and that life itself is the affront. Well, the natural outcome for people that get so extreme is to cause mass suffering and a kind of like retribution for that. And it's so funny because it's like you see that play out in this, right? In like these like white school shooter types, that there's a lot of like, people make a lot about this in culture of like, oh, look at that disgruntled white men. And it's like this philosophy is not much different than what leads someone to do that. And
well, they would say, I assume, to steelman the Afro-Pessimism argument, which I know nothing about, they would say, no, actually, there is a history of repression that's very real. Here, we're detailing it for you. It's not just about revenge. It's about revolution, and a justified revolution. That's what they would, I assume, say. Now, again, I don't know that I want to comment a great deal about it, because I don't think that ultimately, most likely, that works out in anyone's interest. But
yeah, I don't. That's
what they would say, I assume. Again, I read a Wikipedia article before we started the podcast while I was waiting for you to set up your camera, so I'm not going to suggest that I'm an expert on Afro-Pessimism. I may be more of an expert. Do you think I'm more of an expert on Afro-Pessimism than you, or do you think that you're more of an expert?
I think I'm more of an expert.
Okay, fine.
Just by a little bit. Just because I've like grown up in the culture that's like steeped in that kind of worldview. So I have like I read about it more like as the specific ideology or philosophy, but once I read about it, I was like, oh, okay, so that's the name for this thing that I've seen, espoused. Whatever, this is kind of like, the Afro-Pessimism is boring. It sucks. I don't like it. I don't care. I don't like anything that's going to like blatantly advertise itself as pessimistic. Why would you do that? So here's the thing, is that I think, right, because I didn't fully answer this question, the question is not like whether it's good. Obviously this person already recognizes that it's no good, but the problem is that it's like somehow become this dominant lens for the progressive left to view things, which is true, right? Because hello, NPR, where every headline is how like dishes actually are ableist and chairs actually are racist, and it's just like everything comes down to somebody's getting oppressed somewhere, and it's like, yeah, this is the state of life also, but that's a choice to make it the dominant framework by which you understand everything. That's a choice, and I think that's actually what answers this question in how to move beyond that choice, is that there will have to be other choices made. And I have a small amount of faith, but I do have faith that people will ultimately recognize that willingly adopting ideas that make them miserable is not a good choice, that they can make other choices. I have faith that there will be just enough cultural pushback to show the difference between a life chosen to be lived in this kind of, framework where everything is essentially evil. That's actually what this comes down to. When you say that everything comes down to racial oppression, you're saying that the dominant pattern of life is evil. That's what that is. It's so dark. It's truly like really dark. So, I mean, yeah, hey, choose that worldview, whatever. That's fine. I think that you let that experiment play out, and eventually people are going to see, well, this is just miserable. I mean, how are we all doing, spending time online constantly consuming misery-inducing content? Everybody's mentally ill. Everybody's depressed. I don't think it's working out.
Can I answer this briefly then? And then that'll be the end of my...
And then we shall move on.
So that last thing you just said, everyone's sitting online, letting this content make them miserable. The question is, how do you move past it? And I think the way to move past it is to not engage with it.
Well, we failed then.
I tried my best.
No, well, also, I don't think.
Well, is Will Smith an Afro-Pessimism? Is he an adherent of that?
He was for a moment. I don't know.
Theology? I don't know if it's a theology or not.
He said, Christopher Rock is having too much fun. Let's slap some pessimism into the man. Anyway,
there are some seriously bad consequences for this if it continues to play out for society as a whole.
Yeah, it's a really frightening thing, because I think that the most important thing is to understand that the logical conclusion of that view is to just burn everything down. Like, if you have to go out, you have no choice, then you go out kicking and screaming, and you take as many people out with you as you can. That's the logical conclusion of a worldview that says everything is set up against you and it always will be. That's really, really bad. So hopefully, my hope is that people recognize that you just become a pawn of that. You just become a pawn of that ideology, and you just end up sacrificing yourself for something that doesn't actually dignify you. It doesn't serve people as individuals. And so my hope is that becomes more apparent, and people reject that because they have the freedom to do that now. That's
it's not
why
about your analysis is so very Ben Shapiro. There is no thought of the individual in this kind of stuff. And when you get to the extreme left and the extreme right, the concept of the individual does not matter. The concept of the individual is very important in a kind of moderate American dream type of thought process. When you get over to the farther edges of the left and the right, they both wish to eliminate the individual. So your prescription for, if you're talking about people who are wondering about it that aren't involved in these things, then yeah, what you're saying makes sense. Continue to think about yourself as an individual, how you operate in the world. This ideology won't serve you well, so you should reject it on that basis. But that's not that isn't what people on the extreme left and the extreme right, they don't even come from that perspective.
Well, I'm not talking to those people, because I have a sense that they don't listen to our podcast.
Most likely not.
Most likely not. And I don't think that they're in a position to be convinced out of it. I am speaking more to people that might be considering that, like have been, have brushed against it, because it's the scary thing to me about things like this is that they seep into culture in a kind of like diluted way, and people can adopt ideologies without realizing what they're actually buying into. You can enact a full ideology without even realizing what you're enacting and what the outcome of that ultimately is. That seems to me the way that ideology actually works. It seems to be set up in a way that it almost flourishes if people carry it out without realizing what they're actually carrying out. And so I think that the important part right now is that we have the freedom to choose different beliefs. You actually don't have to conform to ideologies under threat of violence or under, serious threat of like exile, from your job or from your society. And so there is still the potential for these things to fade away. And that would be the futuristic view that I have if I was going to do some futurism, some predicting of a future that is better and grander and far off, probably. It would be one where ideologies are seen as kind of like a primitive thing that humans cling to, and because they had such little understanding of the world and of themselves that they needed these like fragmented stories to make sense of the world and to replace what they had lost as they entered into civilization and expanded in their civilizations.
You're turning me into an Afro-pessimist Marxist as you talk, though, because I'm thinking about what they would, I'm guessing what they would say, and so I'm actually going to give this point a bit of credence for a moment. They would say, you're delusional because state power always operates under an ideology. And so your desire to say, oh, we're all just individuals actually empowers the current structure of oppression of which certain people live under. And by simply going to this humanistic perspective of, hey, we should all get along and be individuals, that in and of itself is actually has baked into it oppression of people based on historical circumstance. That's what they would say. And so that your dream beyond this kind of ideological lens that everyone has to live under is actually a nightmare for some people.
Yeah, but then...
Have you just radicalized me to become a...
Yeah. But then what's the alternative is my rebuttal.
The alternative is violent revolution, which is, I think, what they would say. Maybe the moderate answer on the part of these people, and again, I'm speculating.
Yeah.
And I'm really very much like in the Russian Revolution mindset because of all my reading lately. But what my other guess they would say is structural reform based on ideas of equity to change dynamics in terms of racial privilege and all that kind of stuff, which doesn't necessarily require, say, violent revolution. So maybe the more moderate view of this position, which I don't actually agree with, would say something like that. And we do see some of those things being enacted. I think that the really hardcore version of it would be saying there is no alternative but violent revolution.
Yeah, that's kind of, to me, the also the insane answer, because that's just, we're going to oppress different people then, which is okay, fine. That's been kind of the framework that humans have taken throughout human history, which is don't oppress us, but we are going to oppress you. It's just kind of like a back and forth between groups forever.
Again, like I say, I don't think much of this really actually matters to real people, like whether they're white, black, whatever they are. I actually don't think most people sit around thinking about Afro-pessimism. My concern is that as circumstances in this country become dire, then these ideologies will actually attract more and more people because they have no other alternative. And so if you want, and then maybe we'll have to do 3 AMAs, I don't know, but there is a news story that came out that should be mentioned briefly. And I know about it because I'm from Kentucky. So This did not get much press at all. There's a guy in Louisville, Kentucky, who was part of the Black Lives Matter movement, who was big into all that during the George Floyd protests and all that kind of stuff. I think it was a month or two ago, he went to the office of the Democratic mayoral candidate for Louisville, Kentucky, and tried to assassinate him. He shot at him and missed several times, ran away, was arrested, and then bailed out by basically Black Lives Matter Louisville. Basically didn't spend any time in jail whatsoever. That's his right. Everyone has a right to be bailed out until they have a trial. Fine. That story did not get very much press whatsoever. Now that, and I don't think, and look, I didn't delve into this a great deal, but I read a little bit about the guy. That guy wasn't
crazy.
As far as I could tell, he had an ideology. He has an idea. Like, he's not, maybe he's also insane. I don't know. That's the thing. They always say, well, dealing with mental issues. I understand, but radical ideologies appear to be mental issues outside of the structure of the broader narrative. So to be fair to this guy, maybe he simply believes what he believes. I don't know what that is. Again, specifically, I'm not taking this guy's side. I'm saying that that's the kind of stuff, though, that as I'm reading about the Russian Revolution, like, it was something like in the years leading up to it, like 25,000 government officials assassinated in Russia before this. That scale, this is why I get irritated about the Twitter fights and all this kind of stuff, because I'm just trying to say that, like, we're so lucky still in this country, the amount of stability we have, the amount of wealth we have, the amount of all this stuff we have. And I understand that it's not equally the case amongst all people and all that. I understand. But we're not anywhere near. This is all, a lot of this is very academic right now, you know? But my concern, again, is that things become so bad for so long that we actually go into real problems, like people trying to assassinate mayors and stuff. That's not, people think that nothing can happen until it all happens. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that we're at that point. I actually do have faith in America as a stable-ish environment to deal with problems slowly, usually. Too slow for a lot of people's desires. But this is all academic to me until there's no food. And I keep saying this, I always say this, but like, or until the economy collapses, or until something something really bad happens. And that's what I've learned more and more as I've read about real revolution, is that the thing that actually usually precipitates it is a national disaster. In the case of Russia, the national disaster was World War I, where there were millions of Russian soldiers dead for years and years and years, and then famines. And I don't know. Like, again, I'm not trying to, like,
yeah, well, it's just kind of
too
like
apocalyptic, but I just think this is all academic to some degree for now.
Well, I mean,
but there's little hints.
To your own point, you say, like, it's academic until it's not. And so
right.
My concern is that we do obviously see this kind of shift where the average person is more, I don't want to say politically engaged. I want to say more extreme politically, like pulled towards more extreme ideas politically. And like I see the filtering of these kind of like academic ideas to the average person. Like people that I know never really had an interest in these kind of ideas or politics even, in a more specific sense beyond like going to vote every 4 years or whatever, suddenly adopting worldviews and stances that do come from these academic, complex ideologies, but they don't know it. Which,
can I say something controversial and then end, because we're already like 50 minutes into this?
Okay.
I think that what you're saying is true. People are very politically agitated in general right now, and some of that is just the tools of agitation, which is social media. If things get bad, and what I mean by bad is not, oh, gas is $5 a gallon. That's not bad. Look at how we scream. And I'm not trying to say this isn't like that gas prices being higher isn't bad for people. It is. It affects people. It affects working class people more than anyone else. In fact, it only affects working class and poor people. But this isn't bad. What I'm saying is when there's no food, okay? If that day comes, and I don't think that it necessarily will, but if that day comes,
Well,
okay,
I'm
and you look
saying-
at grain exports out of Russia and the Ukraine, and you start to, and no one knows about that, and you start to think, oh, well, what would it take actually for there not to be food? And then what I'm saying is all the people on Twitter that are this and that, they're going to join the group that feeds them and gives them stuff. That's it. The ideology is gone. You'll find left-wing activists on Twitter joining fascist right-wing groups if they feed them rice.
Yeah, well,
That's the reality of how this shit goes
I'm
down.
saying is that it's not that black and white. Like, it's not like tomorrow all the food disappears. What I'm saying is that it should give us pause when gas reaches historic prices, because that means there's less money to spend on food. And it should give us pause when a war breaks out on another part of the world, but with countries that are connected to the state of our country, because that does affect, the different things that make life more unstable. And I believe there's already, whatever notices coming from the White House about there's going to be, like, is it food prices are going to increase? So yes.
I think they said food shortages, actually.
Yeah, I did. I was going to say that, but I decided not to because that seems more extreme. So I wanted to, give the benefit of the doubt.
I believe that's actually the wording of whatever that statement
think you're
was,
right.
which is not incorrect. They're not lying.
So it's like, yes, it's not that people are starving. I'm sure once it gets there, it's that bad then. But at what point do we really start to kind of wake up? That's my main concern, is that, yeah, I see where these things go. I see how things change once it gets really bad. But what I don't see is, where is the line where we're able to turn around and say, hold on a minute, let's stop before it gets that bad? When do we start taking, what signs are the ones that we start taking serious as like indicating that we're going towards that direction? If it's not going to be historically high gas prices or notices of food shortages, what comes after that? Like, how bad does it have to get before we start talking about this as a serious problem and stop fighting on Twitter about transgender swimmers?
We're talking about it right now. And I look, not to be too pessimistic myself.
Not to be too Afro-pessimistic.
And we make jokes and all this because we try to keep it fun. But
the apocalypse can be fun.
Maybe some of the strife that has occurred during the pandemic, some of the strife that has occurred in terms of the debate about racial equality over the last couple of years, with all that, maybe the high gas prices, maybe the coming apparent food shortages, which will most likely not actually affect America as much as it will poorer countries. Maybe all that is the kind of light warning signs that we can bring things back and we can move back a little bit. But this is where I am pessimistic, and I'm pessimistic for all of us. I think it all works out fine as long as these challenges can be dealt with and we can deal with them slowly. In the year 2019, I did not expect a virus to hit the globe, shut down all the economies of the richest countries in the world, precipitate political unrest, kill ostensibly a lot of people. I didn't expect that in December 2019. I remember my life at that point. So knowing that, I have to wonder what to expect next month. Knowing that I can't even whatever comes, I don't even it could be something that I can't even figure out at this point. But that's how we live. Look, we all have to live with uncertainty, and that's how
That's
we
how
always
all
live.
of us live. We always live wondering.
Well, we do.
What
We do.
catastrophe is coming around the corner? Yes and no. I mean, yes and no, because we can't totally live like that, because we would just live in such a high level of anxiety, and you'd never be able to make future plans realistically. But at the same time, we do all know that we don't know what could come tomorrow. At least you should try to be somewhat in touch with that, because it will guide you to live in a certain kind of way that's a little more focused on the important things, shall we say. But on that light note, we should end, but I would like to do one more question that's lighter. That's just one more.
Sure.
We won't do the discernment one. We'll save that for the patron only. But
Okay.
I'd like to, because we can end on something a little loose, a little more philosophical, a little more fun. Don't leave
Okay.
the people suffering with their Afro-pessimistic views at the end of an AMA. So we got a question that is, what in the world are you looking to encounter? And this question's a little vague, and that's why I specifically included it, because at first I was like, what does this really mean? And then I decided that I would interpret it the way that I wanted to interpret it. And so I like the use of encounter and what in the world. What in the world are you looking to encounter? And I kind of feel like, in some regard, I do feel like I'm trying to encounter things in the world more. I tend to be a little bit more of a hermit and a homebody person and avoidant of new experiences and all of this. So I'm actually just trying to encounter the world more. And there's a way that I am trying to go about that, which requires really being open to what may come and what I might not know. And I'm trying to hone that method of relating and encountering the world, which is, if something happens, not to immediately try to fit it into the way I see the world, but to at least sometimes try to see if there's one different way I could understand that event, one different way I could interpret something rather than my default way of interpreting something. And that flexibility in encountering the world kind of also just reminds me that I don't know everything, and that there's so much that I don't understand about how life itself works. And I feel kind of like, I don't know, lately I also feel, it's not like I want a unified theory of everything thing, but I just feel like there's so much to life that we don't understand, like to living on earth, like to not even just to being human, but to like life. There's probably something so much bigger. It sounds like I'm about to discover God or something, but I feel like there's these things about life that I don't know, and I wish I had a longer life to figure them out, because I don't think humans live long enough to figure everything out, obviously, but even to figure out these kind of like really big things. It seems like I'm so concerned about like smaller things in my day-to-day life, and I don't, always, not like always grappling with like the deepest elements of living. But that's kind of what I'm trying to encounter, is like trying to encounter life, like the actual world, not something specific, not trying to interpret what happens in any particular way. But every now and then I have this this experience of feeling like I don't know something that I have previously taken for granted as knowing. So recently there was like all of this talk about the gender teaching stuff that's going on in the schools. And for a second, I had this sense of like, what if you're on the wrong side of this? What if they're actually just trying to teach kids about an important part of being a human being? Maybe you have a completely maladapted worldview on this. Maybe you're being reactionary. Maybe you don't even understand it, and you're falling into the trap of becoming an older, conservative, reactionary, propaganda-filled person. And so just for a second, because no, I don't think that, but just for a second, I genuinely felt like skepticism towards a deeply held belief. Like, I'm deeply against, teaching kindergartners about like being intersex and whatever. That's incredibly confusing for children at that age. That's way earlier than they need that. They're not even in puberty. Like, that's really out of control. So I am actually like really not into that at all. I think it's quite pernicious. But I had this experience of just, not intentionally either, it just kind of hit me, what if you're completely wrong about this? And I have this with different things. I think it's a little bit like, it's partially a flaw of self-doubt, where I tend to doubt myself, and it's like, this almost imposter syndrome of even your ideologies or whatever. But if it's used right, like, I think you can actually use that kind of skepticism towards yourself to remind yourself that you shouldn't cling too hard to anything, because you might actually be wrong. And so that's what I think I'm trying to encounter in the world. Just encountering it. Just allowing things to happen and not immediately trying to formulate them and incorporate them into my already preset worldview. It's hard to describe. It's not, this is the other thing. It's like, there's this whole other aspect to living that's like more not intellectual. It's not intellectual. And I am trying to lean more into that. The Jungian stuff has helped, like learning about Jung and how he interprets things like synchronicity and whatever. That's kind of a little bit more towards the mode of what I'm talking about. But that's it. That's, I think, what I'm trying to encounter. What about you? I'd love to hear how you answer this question.
Well, I think you've satisfied us with your hippie psychobabble long enough. I don't really have a lot of.
Not trying to encounter anything.
I think more in terms of what I don't want to encounter as opposed to what I want to encounter. I think that's more the best way I would explain it.
That's kind of depressing.
It's not depressing. I think it was a pragmatic worldview, which allows me to move about the world to and fro relatively at ease.
Okay, I won't press you on what you're trying to encounter in the world.
It's just such a.
It is. It's a
in
such
the clouds
a vague
question.
That's why I thought it was fun to try to answer it.
It is. I get it, and I'm not. Anytime I lambast the questioner, it's for fun. It's not because I'm actually, upset at them. But I can't. I'm so.
You're in the war room. You're in the.
I'm very much, dude, I don't know about encountering the world. I'm reading stuff about death camps at 5 a.m. in Russia. And, that's what I'm trying to do right now.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get through that. I'm trying to, you know what? I will answer briefly this question. You know what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to encounter the tragedy, the destruction, the ultra-violence of history, and keep stable. Because when you actually get down into this, and it is the world, I know it's not going outside and touching grass and drinking from a pure mountain stream or whatever it is that hippies like to do, but it is the world, and it's worse. So it's a potential world, and I'm trying to really understand why and how people do these things to each other, and not let it destabilize me. I think that it actually is dangerous to read history. I actually do. I was reading this book, big history books often have little sections in them that have pictures. And so I was getting ready to go to sleep, and I happened to be, let me, sometimes you read a lot and you're like, fuck, let me look at some pictures,
Yeah.
And so I was thumbing through, I was like getting ready to go to sleep, and it's a picture of the famine in Russia, region, there's just bodies stacked in what looks like a dumpster or something. And I'm like, fuck me, man. Like, that's what I had to see right before I go to sleep. And it's, but you can ignore all this. And actually, I think that for most people, you should. I actually think that it's better, probably, for most people to ignore a lot of
I think
this
it's
stuff.
only better if the society allows for that properly.
Well,
like,
it does so far.
It does so far. That's the thing. Like, we actually have the luxury of being able to ignore the potential catastrophe and suffering and the propensity to enact that in certain instances, because the society is set up in a way that incentivizes pro-social behavior and penalizes antisocial behavior. The danger is when that changes, because then that's when the ignorance of what can happen, it becomes dangerous, because now it can happen again and it's much more likely. This is my fear.
So yeah, anyway, at the moment, that's what I'm kind of doing in terms of encountering the world. I'm encountering the past and trying to, and look, hey, I've been doing it for a long time, so should be fine. Other than that, I'm going to go swim in the ocean at some point. That's on my list of things to do. I like swimming. Like to swim. I'll go to the beach. I have basically not seen a great deal of sunlight for the last couple of years, so I have on my goals for this month, I'm going to be going and getting a half hour of sun for an X amount of times per month, and I'm going to be doing that. So that's how I'll also be encountering the world.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and look, I mean,
that is
I've
quite
been
literally encountering the world. That is the physical encountering of the world. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. I make lists, of course, of the ways in which I'm plotting to encounter the world this month, and I will continue to do that. And I'm going to slowly start to. I've taken this time during the pandemic. It put me in a very isolated mode of being, which I already kind of enjoy, but I'm slowly starting to encounter the world in a physical way more and more by actually just going out and doing things, which primarily is I'm going to go swim.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I agree. I have the same issue where I was kind of like went into a hermit mode and kind of had to rediscover interacting with the physical world, like the outside world, not just my kind of like bubble world. Very strange. We could go into that a little bit. We won't. But there is something strange in how that kind of trains you to be a hamster. Like, I kind of felt like I became like someone's gerbil, I stayed home. I did my things from home. And I started to feel less like I could affect the outside world. Like, I had to kind of like relearn how to feel comfortable going into new places, dealing with new people, like making things happen in my environment and like really taking action more, because my world became so primarily intellectual, like cognitive. All of my work is just, with my mind, so I'm not like physically doing anything. And then in a space that's completely like sterile in terms of action. There's no spontaneous action in my home, I hope, for the most part, because it's just me and that's it. Like, very strange. You kind of become like a little bit like of a gerbil, And if you let an animal that's been in a cage out, they're kind of like, what, like, especially if you've ever seen like certain animals, if you let them out and they're in an open space, it's because they're prey. But like if they're in too open of a space, they like freak, because they're exposed. And so I don't know, it's kind of like, it's a little pernicious though, because it's like, if you wanted to have a very docile population, I'm not saying that this was on purpose. That's it's crazy. But for future dictators and whatnot, you just lock people in their home for a while, they get pretty soft, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's a pretty good way to break the whole spirit, get people acting like gerbils and shit. What weird. Get people to desire less too, because it's like, now what? Look at you. I'm gonna go sit in the sun. I want to go touch the water. Like, what? This is like, we're and I love it for you. Like, I love that for you. That's very nice, and I think that's right. But it's also like, that's been
before the pandemic though. That was I would put the same things on my list.
Less so though,
because I've lived the same way for a long time. in not a particularly like
Yeah, out their way.
yeah. So
But still, both
to me,
of us were way
bet
more
I could
out
look
there.
through my notebook and find the same things, like go swim X amount of
Forever.
times.
All right,
No, I mean really.
go swim, go touch grass. Don't be a pessimist. What else? What else do we have here?
Hopefully
Don't
a
lie.
non-lengthy conclusion.
Don't lie and join the patrons. Join the patrons of the Silverized Society so that you can get our next portion of this AMA, which will be better because now we're warmed up. You know, we spoke about famine, we spoke about Afro-Pessimism and the cultural enacting of mass retribution. We're warmed up now for the next portion where we're going to talk about art. We're going to talk about the soiling of art with social media. We're going to talk about what art out there is actually challenging this culture. We're going to talk about preserving individual freedom, and we're going to ask what is. Got a lot coming up. So see you on the next part of this month's AMA.